Welcome back. We're talking about the evolving relationship between the United States and Saudi Arabia. Let's go straight to our panel. Kenneth, I want to pick up with you, Kenneth Katzman. We've talked about oil. We've talked about Iran. Let's talk about counterterrorism, because we saw the new CIA director out in Saudi Arabia actually giving medals for the fight against counterterrorism. But there is a feeling here in the US and elsewhere that actually Saudi Arabia may be encouraging acts of terrorism, looking back to 9/11 and the 15 and the 19 hijackers, Wahhabism, etc. How is that circle squared with this new administration?
Well, there's been a theme of academic and other work out there about that, the hijackers and Wahhabism and all. But I think the bulk of U.S. policy, and it's not going to change in the Trump administration, is that Saudi Arabia is a partner. Now, there was an irritant that we hadn't mentioned, which was the JASTA legislation.
Yes.
The Saudis were extremely upset about that.
Explain that just quickly.
The JASTA was a law basically allowing victims of terrorism to sue a government if there's evidence or proof that a government was involved. It stripped basically the sovereign immunity away.
And that was vetoed by Obama.
It was vetoed, but he was overridden, correct. Now, so that, and the feeling, I think, in the kingdom was that was, urged by those who subscribe perhaps to this view that Saudi Arabia is a sponsor of terrorism or is fomenting terrorism by funding madrasas and various groups that subscribe to the Wahhabi school. But the main thrust of U.S. policy really has been that Saudi Arabia is a close partner against terrorism, particularly the Islamic State.
Ambassador Freeman, you've been ambassador in Saudi Arabia. You have a long experience there. Where is this U.S.-Saudi relationship when it comes to terrorism?
Well, there's a very firm basis for cooperation. Saudi Arabia is a principal partner in the fight against terrorism. But I think we need to recognize one factor here, which is that Americans really don't make a distinction between Sunnis and Shia or Wahhabis or Salafis or jihadis or any of the various schools that are now troubling the Islamic world and the world beyond it. And we have a president who was elected and who staffed his White House with people who are very notably Islamophobic and whose views really do not distinguish between the Muslims of Iran and the Muslims of Daesh or the so-called caliphate in Syria. So there's a serious civilizational or cultural antipathy here, which makes it very hard to have a sensible policy. It gets in the way of cooperation with Saudi Arabia where we should cooperate, and probably leads to excusing Saudi Arabia where we shouldn't.
Do you think the Trump administration were right not to include Saudi Arabia on the recent partial travel ban?
Yeah, and I think the citation of 15 of 19 hijackers being from Saudi Arabia reflects a deliberate decision by Al-Qaeda. Their objective was to drive a wedge between Saudi Arabia and the United States, and they've succeeded beyond their wildest dreams, in my opinion.
Ali, will you pick up on that?
Look, since September 11, the United States, and I was very close to that, to talking about these issues for the past 15, 16 years. They have, the U.S. administrations continues to put Saudi Arabia at a pedestal, to say Saudi Arabia government has nothing to do with this, it's private. Let's look what happened. Let's look at the result today.
Well, there was the pages of the 9/11 report.
Forget that, but I'm saying that what happened in the 15 years? Have we seen progress against terrorism? No. Because...
Well, we haven't seen another major attack with 15 seconds.
No, but around the world, ISIS and Al-Qaeda has increased in number and size. That is because the policy has ignored the real problem, which is the Saudi government, okay? And like I said, the Saudi government has been critical in providing the environment, providing support. In my book, ISIS is a Saudi proxy because a lot of these people who were in jail, they were put in this catch and release program to join ISIS and other groups. The funding comes from Saudi Arabia. So far, since September 11, the U.S. Treasury Department has not sanctioned a single Gulf bank for providing terrorist funding. The money doesn't go through pipes, it goes through banks. And that's the problem with the United States government since the Bush administration.
The American view, can
accurate.
Okay,
The
we'll come on
priority
that.
has been
But I just
somewhere
because the American view is that the Saudi kingdom has been a bulwark against the spread of Wahhabism.
That's not true.
Okay, Iran just conducted a missile test about 3 weeks ago.
The ballistic
The
missiles.
U.S. sanctioned 25 entities. 5 of them were Gulf-based entities. They were involved in Iran's missile program, but they were UAE-based.
They're
So
Iranian-owned.
the U.S. is acting against Gulf. We've
They're not,
sanctioned Kuwaiti financiers of terrorism.
not Saudi
We've sanctioned. There's been some sanctions on terrorism financing, but yes, I mean, obviously
they're not
that's
a single bank.
That's not. Well, the Future Bank in Bahrain was sanctioned.
Yeah, for Iran links,
Yeah,
not
Iran,
for
yes,
ISIS or
okay,
others.
but they
Because,
were
of course,
based
Bahrain
in the
is
Gulf.
Shiite
But they were based in
country
the
with
Gulf
It's for Iranian
countries.
thing. That's the thing with
Well-
the Treasury especially, and I'm very close to that, that the Treasury Department and the FBI Financial, they have made their issue. They use the terrorism issue against the Iranians. They're right to do that, but what about the ISIS and Al-Qaeda? The banks that have given money or travel, I mean, you can see that stuff sometimes on social media, and yet we haven't seen
we
a
don't
single...
believe everything we read on social media.
No, but
especially these days.
for example, the recruiter of the September 11 hijackers, a Saudi, he takes money from the Saudi king, and he has not even named
Well, I mean,
or targeted.
the U.S. got the Kuwait Minister of Finance fired because of alleged involvement in terrorism financing. So
But
we
funding
have
for
acted
Al-Qaeda is
against.
public in Kuwait.
Can we bring the
Well,
ambassador
it
here
was-
in
it
to
was-
weigh in? You know, what I'm seeing here is the dichotomy between whether U.S. policy is right in saying, you know, the Saudi kingdom has been a bulwark against terrorism, or actually underneath it isn't. What do you think?
I think we've made a mistake in not strengthening our cooperation with Saudi Arabia against terrorism.
But what does that
we
mean
need we
exactly?
need an ally in the Muslim world. We need someone with credibility on religious matters in the Sunni world. Saudi Arabia fits those bills. Saudi Arabia internally, and I think Ali actually represents this, is riven with differences between various religious schools, not just between Shia and Sunni, but among Sunnis. So there is a struggle going on within Islam. We ought to be on the side of people who look to the future, not those who want to reimagine and reinstall some vicious version of the past, which is what is going on in Iraq and Syria. And the Saudis have basically been let off the hook. The Obama administration's relationship with them was frosty at best. The Trump administration is viewed more positively by the Saudis. I don't know whether they will be disappointed or not. It's very early days. And I think we have to admit that no one knows what Mr. Trump and his administration are going to do.
And sometimes you get 3 different statements on a single day, as we saw at the Munich.
Tweets, usually.
Yes, tweets or statements by other people. So the policy is still in flux. We can agree. But Alec, I just want to talk about one main idea that has been floated out that we touched on earlier about some sort of alliance, you know, anti-Iran alliance, and Jordan's been brought up, Egypt potentially, the United Arab Emirates with Israel providing intelligence. How does this affect, you know, other problems in the wider Middle East, for example, the Palestinian conflict, where Saudi Arabia has really sort of been pushing its own peace plan, but we've had statements from the Trump administration talking about maybe a one-state solution. I mean, how does this, the US-Saudi relationship, affect regional issues, especially the long-running Israel-Palestinian conflict?
No, the Palestinian-Israeli conflict right now is really a marginal issue in the Middle East. Yeah. Even in Saudi Arabia, we have seen over the past 2 years, for example, Tzipi Livni, the former Israeli foreign minister, with the Saudi foreign, intelligence head, Turki al-Faisal, a member of the ruling family. They are joking, and he's been with many Israeli figures, and there was no reaction domestically there. So there is readiness for even a diplomatic relationship. I think the Obama administration and the Trump administration will be mistaken if they don't push U.S.-Israeli diplomatic relationship, because there is a chance there. And Israel, we have written on this, that Israel has accepted the role of the mistress by dealing with the Saudis under the table, but not allowing this marriage to be public. And I think that that's a mistake. If they want to do it, they should do it publicly, and that's better for the Israelis and for even the Saudis.
Kenneth Katzman, is there room for blowback here in the region where you have Saudi Arabia and Israel sort of cooperating, the Palestinian cause sidelined?
just the opposite.
Right.
Saudi Arabia is pivotal to Mr. Trump's plan to try to get an Israeli-Palestinian peace. He's using what we call the outside-in approach.
Yes,
Instead
I've heard that. I've seen it. Does it work?
Outside-in means get the big Arab players, and Saudi Arabia would be the first on the list to get a deal with Israel or to work out a deal, and then get them to pressure the Palestinians to accept
That's
the
exactly
deal.
what we
It's
wrote
right.
5 years ago.
Ambassador
it's not a
Freeman.
new
I want to hear
idea.
Ambassador Freeman on this.
I don't think this is going to go anywhere, the outside-in strategy. Of course, Saudi Arabia is quite prepared, and Saudis support their government in cooperating with Israel against Iran. Everybody sees Iran as an enemy. I would note that that doesn't play very well in most of the Iranian-dominated part of the Middle East. Ask Hezbollah and Lebanese about that.
And Gaza.
Or the populace in Bahrain, or the people, some of the people in Yemen. So this is a very divisive issue. And I think in the end what will happen is the Saudis will cooperate with Israel against Iran and not much else. And they're certainly not going to abandon their own stance that their stability and long-term interests require some settlement of the Palestinian-Israeli struggle. I don't see that going away. So I think I've seen this sort of thing before. You know, Haig, Secretary of State Haig, beginning of the Reagan administration, went out to the Middle East and said, now, stop squabbling, everybody. There's this terrible problem called the Soviet Union. We all need to line up against that. That didn't work, and I don't think this is going to work either.
It's such a complicated situation. US-Saudi relations, though, obviously heading in a very different direction. I want to thank the panel, Chas Freeman as well. Al-Ahmed, thank you so much. And, of course, Kenneth Katzman here in the studio. It's been fascinating. That's all we've got time for.